When I look back at my life, it feels like a long tunnel, dark in places, bright in flashes, but always moving forward. I was born with calloused hands and empty pockets. My mother used to say, I came into this world with dust on my palms and steel in my bones. Maybe that's why I never feared hard work. At 19, I got my first real job at the Beaumont mines. It was brutal, heat, darkness, and danger, but to me it was hope. The Beaumonts were powerful, untouchable, and I thought working for them would mean stability. I couldn't have been more wrong. One afternoon, an explosion tore through the west shaft. The air filled with smoke, screams, and falling stone. Without thinking, I ran toward the noise. I pulled out 5 men before the shaft caved in. The last one I dragged out was a young man, Edward Beaumont, the heir to the entire company. He thanked me with a trembling hand and said, "You've saved my life." I believed him. I believed in loyalty, in gratitude, in honor. Weeks later, I found out they'd used my ideas, my plans for a safer mining system, and presented them as their own. They built an empire from what I sketched on paper in that dusty mine. I confronted Edward once, but he said, "You're just a worker, you wouldn't understand business." I left that day with nothing but my pride and a deep scar of betrayal. Years passed, I built my own small workshop, met a kind woman named Clara, and together we had Lily, my daughter. My light. I swore she would never know what it meant to be looked down on. I kept that promise, until the day she brought home a man with the name Beaumont. The first time I met Brandon Beaumont, he came to my house in a black suit, and a smile that looked painted on. He had that same air his grandfather once had, the kind that filled a room and made you feel small, even when he was being polite. He shook my hand too firmly and said, "It's an honor to finally meet the man who raised such an incredible woman." His tone was smooth, but his eyes were studying me, measuring me, like I was an inconvenience he'd have to tolerate for Lily's sake. Lily beamed beside him, her hands locked around his arm. She was glowing, truly happy, and that was the only reason I stayed civil. But the longer we talked, the more I realized Brandon didn't ask a single question about Lily's childhood, her mother, or the life we'd shared. He only asked about me, what I did for a living, where I worked, if I still tinkered with tools. Something about the way he said that word, tinkered, made my blood boil. I was polite, but my silence must have told him enough. Later that night, I overheard Lily on the phone, whispering, "He's just proud. Brandon, he doesn't mean anything by it." The next day, she stopped talking about the wedding around me. When the invitations were sent, mine never came. I waited, hoping it was a mistake. Weeks passed, nothing. When I finally asked her, she looked away. "Dad, Brandon thinks it might make things awkward. His family's very traditional." Traditional. That was her gentle way of saying ashamed. That night, I sat alone in my workshop, staring at the old envelope on my desk, the one that held my past, my proof, and my silence. I didn't know it then, but that envelope was about to change everything. I told myself I wouldn't go. I told myself I had no place among the rich and polished people who thought lineage meant worth. But when the morning came, I found myself buttoning the same gray suit I wore to Lily's graduation, the one her mother said made me look respectable. The drive to Rosewood Estate felt endless. Mansions rose from the hills like they were grown from gold. Every gate had guards, every smile was rehearsed. I parked far from the entrance, clutching a small gift, a silver locket I'd made myself. Inside was a picture of Lily as a child, holding my hand. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I just wanted to see her walk down the aisle, to whisper a prayer for her happiness, and slip away quietly. But the moment I stepped through the entrance, the world shifted. Brandon saw me before Lily did. His jaw tightened. He marched across the floor like a man ready to crush a bug. "Sir," he said coldly, "you weren't invited." I tried to explain, but his words came sharper. "Security." 2 guards appeared beside me. My heart pounded as people turned to stare. I caught Lily's eyes. For a brief second, I thought she'd defend me, but she just looked torn, afraid. "I'll leave," I said softly. "No trouble." As they walked me toward the doors, a voice broke through the murmurs, deep, shaken, disbelieving. "Wait!" I turned. The groom's father stood in the crowd, staring straight at me. The color had drained from his face. His wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered. "It can't be," he whispered. "Is it really you?" And just like that, 40 years of silence began to unravel. The music stopped. Every eye turned toward me, but all I could see was him, Edward Beaumont. His face was pale, his lips trembling like he'd seen a ghost crawl out of the ground. "Edward," I said quietly, unsure if he even remembered my voice. He took a step closer. You pulled me out of the mines." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Brandon's confusion turned into irritation. Dad, what are you talking about? Edward ignored him. 40 years ago, there was an explosion in the Beaumont mines. I was trapped, he pointed at me with a shaking hand. He saved my life, carried me out when everyone else ran. I tried to stop him, but it was too late. The guests had already started whispering. Phones came out, cameras flashed. Brandon scoffed. So what, he worked for you once. That doesn't mean he belongs here. Edward turned on him sharply. Watch your tone. There was fear in his voice. Real fear. Lily stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Dad, is it true? I nodded slowly. Yes, but what he didn't say. I added, locking eyes with Edward, is that I also gave him something else before that explosion. Something worth far more than his life. Edward's face went white. The room went silent. What do you mean? Brandon demanded. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the familiar weight, the sealed envelope I'd kept for decades. Let's just say, I murmured, that not everything that built your fortune belonged to the Beaumonts. Edward took a shaky step back. He knew exactly what I meant. And suddenly, he wasn't the one in control anymore. I could feel the weight of every stare as I held the envelope in my hands, old, worn, and sealed with the kind of history that never fades. Dad, what's happening? Lily's voice trembled, caught between confusion and fear. Edward's eyes darted between the envelope and my face. You kept it, he whispered, his voice cracking. Brandon frowned. Kept what? What's he talking about? Edward said nothing, so I spoke instead. 40 years ago, I designed a new mining system, one that would make extraction safer and more efficient. Your father, I said, looking straight at Edward, called it a breakthrough. He promised we'd patent it together. The guests began whispering. I could hear fragments: patent, design, theft. But after the explosion, I continued. I woke up in a hospital bed. The drawings were gone, my name erased. And months later, the Beaumont Company unveiled a revolutionary new design that made them millionaires. Edward's shoulders sagged. His face was a storm of guilt. Brandon stepped forward, scoffing. That's ridiculous. You're just some bitter old man. I smiled slow, steady. Then open it. I handed him the envelope. His fingers trembled as he tore the seal. Inside were the original blueprints, dated and signed by me. Brandon's eyes darted over the papers, his arrogance melting into disbelief. Dad, these are real. Edward's voice broke. He's telling the truth. The room fell silent. I could hear only the distant hum of the string quartet, still playing somewhere outside, unaware that the foundation of a fortune was crumbling inside. I didn't come here to expose you, I said softly. I came to see my daughter marry. Then I looked at Brandon, cold and steady. But maybe I needed to see what kind of man she was marrying, too. And with that, I turned to leave, until Edward's lawyer stood up, pale as a ghost. Sir, he said slowly, if those papers are authentic, then legally, you still own half of Beaumont Industries. The ballroom erupted, gasps, murmurs, and disbelief rippled through the crowd like waves in a storm. Guests who had come for a fairy-tale wedding were now witnesses to a 40-year-old scandal being unearthed. Edward stood frozen, his hands trembling. His wife, Margaret, clutched his arm and hissed, Edward, tell me this isn't true. But the truth was written all over his face. Dad, Brandon's voice cracked. What does he mean, half the company? Edward's lips quivered as he tried to steady himself. Your grandfather, my father, used that design to start our first big operation. Without it, Beaumont Industries wouldn't exist. The lawyer adjusted his glasses nervously. Mr. Blake, if you have those original documents, signed and dated, your ownership rights were never legally revoked. I said nothing. I just watched the room unravel, the same way my life had all those years ago. Brandon's pride collapsed into panic. So what now? You think you can just walk in here and take what's ours? I don't want your money, I said. My voice calm. I just want my name back. My dignity. And maybe now, my daughter will finally know who her father really is. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? Because some stories, I said, sound like bitterness until truth proves them right. Just then, Edward stepped forward. His voice was hoarse, heavy with shame. I didn't know my father stole from you. I was a young man. I thought you died in that explosion. I looked him in the eyes. But you didn't check, did you? Silence. He looked away. No, I didn't. Then came the final blow. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Blake, if you wish to pursue this, you could reclaim full legal ownership of the company, including current assets. Mr. Beaumont would be liable for damages. Margaret gasped. Brandon's face turned white. I smiled faintly. No, I don't need revenge, the truth is enough. The night after the wedding, I sat in my truck, the envelope still resting on the passenger seat. The rain drummed softly against the windshield, each drop echoing the chaos that had unfolded hours earlier. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Mr. Blake, a familiar voice low and sharp. Brandon. What do you want? I asked. You made a fool of my family today. He snapped. You think this ends here? You'll regret ever showing your face. I sighed, leaning back. You sound just like your grandfather did, full of pride, no backbone. There was silence, then a hissed threat. You don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, I know exactly who you are. I said, you're a boy trying to protect a lie. The line went dead. I looked out into the rain again, unease coiling in my chest. Something told me Brandon wouldn't just walk away, and I was right. The next morning, my front gate was slashed open, and my dog Max was missing. I found the collar by the fence. No note, just silence, and the distant hum of an expensive car speeding off. That's when I decided to visit my lawyer again. He frowned as I explained. Mr. Blake, you need to be careful. Beaumont Industries isn't just a company, it's power. You exposed them, and now they'll protect what's left. Then let's finish what they started, I said. He slid a file across his desk. There's one more document. An unregistered patent design your father drew up before he disappeared. It's still in the archives, signed by him and you. I froze, my father. Yes, the lawyer said. And if we can prove the original founder's lineage, you're entitled not just to half, but all. My hands trembled as I held the file. For the first time in decades, I realized the past hadn't finished speaking. But before I could act, a shadow appeared behind the frosted glass of the office door. The handle turned slowly, and I knew Brandon wasn't done with me yet. The office door creaked open, and Brandon stepped inside, his expensive suit soaked from the rain. His eyes were wild, not with anger, but with fear. Behind him, two men in black stood guard like shadows. Mr. Blake, he said, forcing a smile, we need to talk. I didn't move. My lawyer's hand hovered near the phone, but I shook my head. You've done enough talking, son. What do you want now? He looked around nervously, then shut the door. I saw the file you took from my grandfather's safe, the one with your father's signature. Tell me it isn't true. I studied him, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was a boy who'd realized his entire life was built on someone else's lie. Your grandfather and I built that company from nothing, I said slowly, but when he saw how much money it could make, he cut me out, erased my name, buried my father's patent, and bought silence with threats. You're living off stolen ground, Brandon. He staggered back, running a hand through his wet hair. My grandfather said you were a drunk who gambled everything away. I almost laughed. That's the story he sold to sleep at night. Brandon turned toward the window, breathing heavily. If this gets out, everything collapses. The company, my marriage, everything. That's not my concern, I said. The truth doesn't care who it ruins. He spun around, tears burning in his eyes. She didn't know, did she? My wife, your daughter. She didn't know who you really were. I shook my head. No, she didn't, but she will. At that, Brandon slammed his fist on the desk. You'll destroy us all. I leaned forward, calm and cold. No, son, I'll free you. Outside, thunder cracked, like the heavens themselves were preparing for what came next. The courtroom was packed, reporters, lawyers, and curious faces that smelled of greed and gossip. The air felt electric, heavy with whispers and judgment. My hands were steady, though my heart beat like a drum beneath my suit. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about blood, lies, and legacy. Edward Beaumont sat across from me, aged and brittle, his once commanding posture replaced by the guilt of a man cornered by his past. Brandon sat beside him, pale and silent, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Lily sat behind me, my daughter. Her eyes darted between me and the man she'd just married, the man whose family had stolen everything from ours. The judge's voice echoed through the hall. Mr. Blake, you may proceed. I stood and approached the bench, carrying a small black folder, the same folder I had kept locked away for 40 years. Your Honor, I began, this is more than a case of intellectual theft. It's a story of betrayal that tore two families apart. Edward's lawyer jumped up. Objection irrelevant. The judge raised a hand. Overruled, continue. I opened the folder and slid out an old letter, yellowed, creased and signed. This, I said, is a confession written by Edward Beaumont in 1985. He never sent it, but his secretary kept a copy. A gasp rippled through the room. Edward's face drained of color. The judge read the letter aloud. I wronged my partner, I took his design, his trust, and his future. But what haunts me most is what I took from his daughter. She is mine by blood, and he must never know. Lily's voice broke from behind me. What? I turned slowly, my chest tightening. The courtroom spun, the world blurred. Edward buried his face in his hands. Lily whispered, trembling, "You're not just my father's enemy, you're my real grandfather." And for a moment, silence devoured the entire room. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. My knees went weak, and I gripped the wooden table for balance. My daughter, my Lily, stared at me with eyes full of disbelief and pain. "Dad," she whispered, "tell me it's not true." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My chest felt hollow. Like 40 years of truth had suddenly turned into smoke I could no longer hold. Edward lifted his trembling head. I tried to stop her mother. He croaked, "But she loved you. She chose you. I thought if I stayed silent, I could protect her, protect all of you." The judge banged his gavel sharply. Order in the court. But the room was far from order. Reporters were scribbling, cameras clicking, and the Beaumont family sat frozen, like statues of guilt. Lily turned toward her husband, tears streaming. "Brandon, you knew." He shook his head furiously. "No, I swear I didn't." Edward rose slowly, his frail hands gripping the bench. "Everything I built," he said, voice trembling, "was on the back of this man, and the love I stole from his family. The company, the wealth, all of it belongs to him." The judge leaned forward. "Are you confessing, Mr. Beaumont?" Edward nodded. "Yes." The gavel struck again. "Then it is hereby declared, ownership of Beaumont Industries reverts 50% to Mr. Henry Blake, the rightful co-founder and original patent holder." Gasps filled the room. I didn't smile. I didn't even breathe. My eyes stayed on Lily. When the court adjourned, she walked toward me slowly, her face pale, her lips trembling. "You're still my father," she said quietly. "The man who raised me, that's all that matters." I pulled her into my arms, tears hot against my cheeks. Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time it sounded like freedom. As we stepped into the light, I realized something profound. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth finally coming home, no matter how long it takes. And for the first time in 40 years, I was finally at peace.